Hi guys, today I'm going to do something a little unique, looking at something unique throughout this whole entire year, and that is a Criterion Challenge 2023. So there's this list on Letterboxd, I'll get into it and explain it in a second, but basically it's watching films off of the Criterion channel and the Criterion collection from 52 different categories throughout the year, so one for each week. Doesn't have to be in a particular order, doesn't have to be in a certain time frame, so long as they all get done within the year. That's the challenge. I'm going to try and do it. It's a lot of films to watch, one a week. I'm already behind. It's January 8th, I believe, as I'm filming this, so I'm already behind because I haven't watched any yet, but I'm going to try and log my reactions and kind of show you as I go on, like what I thought of the different films and how this helped me to branch out and to see new different perspectives of cinema. Let's get into it. As you can see here, I am recording my screen, and this is the Criterion Challenge 2023. You can see that there's 52 films on this list, but it's much more than 52 that you have to choose from. This is just the 52 that this person plans on watching this year. And there are some interesting, a lot of stuff to dive into if you go down further into the list. But you can watch these in any order, and there's 52 categories here. There's whatever number Criterion has listed here. So there's a random number generator out of about 1,600. So you're just going to watch a completely random movie. I rolled mine, and it was First Man into Space, which was like from 1958 or something. And then this is what really kind of gets you to branch out here. They have different countries, made in Belgium, Taiwan, Canada, Portugal. Not necessarily your most common countries for film. Maybe you would usually watch something that's French, Italian, Japanese, but those countries are a little more off the beaten path. And then we have just all these different pretty unique categories, and if I click into them, some of the lists open up on Criterion's website, some of them open up on Letterboxd, but these are just the lists, the categories that we're going to go through throughout the year if you want to take a good look at this. And then at the end of the year, we're going to go through just some more basic stuff with fantasy, action, crime, specific spine numbers, rating of 3 or lower, and then all of the decades since the 1920s. So what would that be? 10 decades here. And that's also, if you're not used to watching older movies, going to help you branch out a little bit. And these are all very, very good movies. So it's definitely going to be a interesting journey for you, and it's one that I'm taking.
Control to Y12. Control to Y12. Do you read me? Y12 to control. Reading you loud and clear. Over.
I just finished watching The First Man into Space, which was the first film on my vlog list, and this was a very interesting watching experience. It's from 1959, directed by Robert Day, and it's about a guy who gets shot into space and just ends up kind of being taken over by some meteor or dust and turning into a monster of sorts. And so it's a really fun movie. Great to see what they thought of what might happen when man goes to space at the time, obviously a few years before space travel, and how it actually turned out today, being very different. But seeing all the fear in people's minds and just the interesting ideas that came out of that, it was a really fun film to watch. So I really enjoyed this one.
With overtones of extreme personal danger.
Sounds like real trouble.
I just finished watching the second film for my Criterion Challenge, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And man, this is one that I'm going to have to think over a little bit. I'm counting it in my 1990s category. It might be able to count in other categories. It is directed by Terry Gilliam, who made several other films that are also on Criterion, several other interesting films that are very abstract in a sense. And this one is about a real-life journalist who wrote his memoirs that went to Las Vegas and was in a drug spiral of sorts, and it's just a lot of that and very intense experience the whole way through. In parts of it, I felt like, when is this going to end? I'm getting the same thing over and over, and so I kind of ding a star off for that. But overall, the cinematic experience is incredible in this film. I just finished watching Man Bites Dog, and it certainly can be a hard film to watch at times, a little uncomfortable in certain scenes. That being said, this film follows a documentary crew around as they are without a budget and are being paid to produce this documentary by a serial killer who is documenting his murders. And obviously, the subject matter being very intense and the serial killer actor being very good. And I think that's kind of what stands out about this movie is it, you know, after watching the film, I kind of dug a little deeper, watched some interviews with the makers, and they were just in film school, made this on basically no budget, and the actor didn't seem to really have much experience, but did an incredible job. And so for this being made on a shoestring budget and being made by just a couple of film school students for a class project, it is an incredible film.
I seem to be a very special person now. I'm in the middle of a strange adventure.
I just finished watching The Brood, which was from my Canada requirement on this list, and I really enjoyed it. I have to say that of the 3 Cronenberg films I've watched, the other 2 being Crimes of the Future and Videodrome, this was certainly the best of all the Cronenberg films that I've watched. It follows a dad who has had his wife taken to a mental institution and is having some sort of unique therapy there. And he discovers that his daughter has some bruises, and he thinks that his daughter was given these bruises during the time that she was allowed to visit his wife. And so obviously this leads to the rest of the plot, and I don't want to spoil too much, but it has a really interesting themes in there that are very Cronenberg-esque. I think that in this case, it's just done at a very educated level without as much of the frills of some of his other films, because it just feels a little more raw, which I kind of like. Definitely recommend watching this if you're into Cronenberg. It's certainly not going to be for everyone. There's some body horror type stuff in there, and I definitely think that just in general, the point that Cronenberg makes with his art is really interesting. So huge recommendation for that, and also just for listening to that point, like your body does react to your emotions. Just finished watching The Double Life of Veronique on the Criterion channel, and this was for my films to fall asleep to in the collection, and I really enjoyed it. I was definitely falling asleep at parts. It was definitely on the slower side of things, but still an incredible film in many ways. I thought the plot structure was very interesting. It's about a young lady named Veronique who has basically a double of her living in a different city in the same country in Poland, and they basically kind of are living very parallel lives in many ways. So without spoiling too much, I think it's best if I allow the plot to unfurl for you as it goes, because it really does unfold quite geniusly. And again, there's some places in it where it's kind of hard to interpret exactly what's happening. There's some places in it where you have to invest a lot to really like get through, but it really all comes together at the end, and would highly recommend.
We've met before, haven't we? I don't think so. At your house, don't you remember?
So just last night I watched Lost Highway by David Lynch, and I needed to take about a day to process it before actually launching into a little summary of my thoughts on it. It was an incredible movie, as all of Lynch's films are that I have seen, and it was definitely a great expression of his style. More than almost any of his other films, I think that this film, based on what I've read, what I've watched, and just my own interpretation of it is not meant to be taken literally, is very symbolic and metaphorical, and is about the nature and the relationship between good and evil, and the relationship in a humanic form between man and evil. And I don't want to go too deep into it without spoiling it, but essentially is about a husband and his wife, and the husband struggles with some scene of ghosts and people who are haunting them and entering their house, etc. And again, don't want to spoil the way that this plot just marvelously unfolds. Definitely, if you're a fan of Lynch and his style, recommend going and watching it. There is a fair amount of nudity in the film, so if you're trying to avoid that, or if you have little kids, don't recommend. But overall, definitely an interesting watch that is worth it from a thematic perspective if you really take the time to dive into it.
Real relationship with a person that goes on for years, well, that's completely unpredictable.
For the food on film category, I watched My Dinner with Andre, and the plot is very simple. It's just about two men who sit down and have dinner, and one of the men is essentially the narrator, and he's meeting Andre Gregory, who is basically been traveling around the world and is an actor, and they're both in the film industry or the stage acting industry in some sense. Not too much plot to it, mostly just an interesting conversation, and it really is fascinating how involved you can get in this conversation and how simple of a film it is, yet how impactful of a film it is. So highly recommend going and checking this out. Very pure, very, very pared down, and I definitely recommend it.
Would you please get off this line?
Well, they didn't hit the moon with the first missile shot either.
I watched Pillow Talk for my 1950s category, and it was definitely an interesting movie in terms of the plot and the structure of it. That being said, did fall short in a couple places. It is about a man and a woman who share a phone line, and the woman is kind of mad at this man because he's a womanizer, and he is basically, always chatting it up with different women on the line and singing them the same song, but just changing the name basically. And she is kind of hated by this man because he sees her as being very restricted and having problems with being able to get a man, and just as kind of lame. But basically they end up meeting in real life, and she doesn't know that this guy is him, and he's attracted to her, she's attracted to him, and he has to pretend to be someone else in order to get her to like him. And as you can see, this obviously is heading for kind of a tragic destination, but definitely worth watching, probably with your teenagers or whatever. It's a good sort of slightly more wholesome older movie, and the plot structure is really interesting. Just looking back at that and seeing the phenomenon of the party line, the shared phone line, and the way the phone line companies worked back then, things have definitely changed so much. So a nice time capsule this movie is, with pretty good acting performances. And the one other thing that I was going to say is that this film was really held back by the sound effects and the use of saying those characters' thoughts out loud. I think that this made it a little less serious than it could have been, and without that element, it probably would have had an extra half star, maybe even a full star for me. That's the first 8 movies in this Criterion challenge, and I am going to be continuing to watch them throughout the year. I'm going to post a new video, I think 4 more installments of this as I watch more films, with a grouping of these vlogs. And if you want to see those, you can subscribe and hit the notification bell as they pop up. And then if you follow my Letterboxd, you can see the more regular updates of the films that I am watching throughout the year. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.